Good evening, gentlemen. There's a slight drizzle on, and I hope all of you are sitting at home, safe and sound. I'm going to once again talk about the Ukraine problem because there have been certain more developments, and that has queered the pitch. It just about shows that there's not going to be a solution to the Ukraine problem in any near future. I'm pretty certain that as far as Ukraine is concerned, and thanks to their president, Mr. Yelenskii, they're going to lose a lot of their territory, and I don't think they are going to be able to get it back despite all the bravado and talks by the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian government that we'll take the territory in the Donbas region back. Now I'll explain to you everything. Ukraine elected Mr. Yelenskii as the president. Fair enough, they can elect anybody. But this man, who had no political experience, probably thought that he's in for something very big. He's going to be a big hero and fight for the Anglo-Saxon powers and become a frontline state against Russia. He wanted to join NATO, become a member of the EU, and forget about all association with the Russians which they had for hundreds of years. And it's on record that so many Ukrainian leaders were members of the Supreme Soviet. There's so many of them. Even their president was a Ukrainian. But all that is forgotten, and Yelenskii went about his way in a very, very hard-hearted manner. He even was going to make the Russians second-class citizens in Ukraine. And Russia, there is a sizable minority of Russians in Ukraine, and perhaps people may not be knowing, the majority of the Ukrainians speak Russian. This was like the red rag to a bull, and Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, as a military soldier and a historian, I will say that the Russians failed, because in 7 months of fighting, they haven't been able to achieve what they wanted to achieve. They wanted a regime change. They wanted that Ukraine should be occupied by another regime. Yelenskii should be sent away in exile or something, but it didn't happen that way. And now, after 6 months of fighting, there has been a counterattack from the Ukrainians, and certain villages and places in the northern Ukraine, which are close to Kyiv and Kharkiv, have been taken over by the Ukrainians after bitter fighting. But it's not the end, because in a seesaw battle, sometimes land is given and taken away. And I will remind you, in the Second World War, in the battles in Kharkov against the Nazi army, the Red Army and the Nazis fought bitterly, and the city changed hands 6 times. So if that is the case, there is no certainty that whatever Ukraine has taken is going to be with them. Now, the situation has been further queried, because though the Ukrainians did advance, but they had not gone in any great strength, no distance. The entire eastern region, that is the Donbas region, is just a minuscule area, a few miles here and there, they are taken. What about the massive area still under Russian control? What about the Crimea, which is one of the most prized areas of this region, on the Black Sea, which is still with Russia? It's integrated as part of Russia. Now, what has happened is that the Russian parliament, that the Duma and Putin have now decided that most of the eastern Donbas region, which are pro-Russia, they will hold a referendum. They are integrated as part of Russia. And that means the two regions, the Luhansk and the Donetsk region, will be part of Russia now. And there is no doubt about it that 95% of the population is going to vote for that. They don't want to be with Ukraine. Now, this is a very significant step, because in case these areas, if you can see on the map, become part of Russia, then attacking these areas would be tantamount to attacking Russia. And that is something which the West is not going to do. Now, there have people been talking, I had made a comment in one of my earlier videos, that the Americans are not going to intervene on behalf of Ukraine. And one good gentleman did mention that why should you say that? Because the Americans went and fought for the Europeans during 2 world wars. Very true. But the situation then was different. And in those cases, if you remember, the declaration of war was made on America by the opponent. America didn't declare war. Germany declared war on America first. And that is the reason the Americans went in against Germany. Secondly, Germany was entirely an alien regime, a barbaric regime. And at that time, Churchill and Roosevelt were allied with Joseph Stalin. Who can deny that? They fought the war together as allies. And suddenly, after the war is over, they'll start saying Putin is a murderer, this thing, that thing. I mean, it's a bit of a joke. That's all I can say. Putin is as good or as bad as any leader. He wants to hang on to power, which is every leader wants to do that. Donald Trump wanted to hang on to power, and you know what happened? He had to be forcibly evicted from the White House. So Americans are not going to fight Russia because the situation is different. I'll remind you that in 1950, when the Chinese army had pushed the American army right to the edge of the sea, it created a lot of panic. And General MacArthur, who was the commander-in-chief of the American army, rang up to President Truman and told him, let's drop an atomic bomb on China. And believe me, Truman was considering it till he was dissuaded by the British Prime Minister. Why? Because he said, what happens tomorrow if the Russians bomb Berlin? Don't do it. And so they didn't do it. The situation is something similar here. If the Americans enter the war, make a no-fly zone over Ukraine, it's like fighting Russia. That means you want to have a war with Russia? And it's not like the Second World War, where there were only conventional weapons, tanks, artillery, all these things going on. Russia is a very formidable power, and it's a nuclear power, as I've said earlier, and it can create havoc in America. The Russians have the strike forces to hit America, and Americans can also hit Russia. So what's it going to be? As Einstein said, it will be destruction back to this Stone Age. Now, none of the Americans are going to do that. Be sure about it. They're pretty wise people. Biden can just go the way Rumor Gordon had written her famous book, thus far and no further. He's not going to do anything more than that. Weapons, yes, all that is okay. But American ground troops are not going to be there. If they are not going to be there, I think the other countries, around about like Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, you don't expect them to join Ukraine to throw the Russians out. And Ukraine has got a patriotic fervor. The army is fighting well. But there's opposition against Yelenskii. He's faced at least 2 or 3 assassination attempts. And now the situation is, will the Ukrainians be able to recapture the entire region, that is the Donbas region, the entire one, as well as the Crimea? It would be very naive of anybody to think, or even Yelenskii to think, that they'll be successful and they'll throw the Russians back hundreds of miles and then go and say that this is our territory and everything honky-dory. It's not going to happen like that. If it had to happen, it would have happened by now. In 6 months of fighting, if the Russians made only minimal gains, but still they got 20% of the Ukrainian territory, the Ukrainians gained nothing. I mean, what have they achieved? They've destroyed their country. And all credit should go to Mr. Yelenskii. He's the man. He's destroyed Ukraine. 8 million refugees, industry destroyed, the country of Europe finished, and given away 20% of his territory to Russia, and about 100 soldiers casualties every day. Now what's the gain? If somebody tells me he's gained a lot, it beats my imagination. All this could have been nipped in the bud if he had not gone in to join NATO, not made his application to join the EU. I remember in one of his speeches, he was waving the application in front of the cameras. Look, I'm asking for a fast track entry into the EU. What was the purpose? I didn't see any purpose in it except to bait the Russians, and they took the bait, and now Yelenskii is paying for his life and for the destruction of Ukraine. And I'm very sure, as a historian, people can come back to me after a few months and tell me whether I was wrong. Ukraine will not be able to reclaim the areas which have been taken by Russia. There may be a minor adjustment of border here and there. But tomorrow, if the Russians really mount an offensive, a full-scale offensive with their army, it's going to be very difficult to Ukraine to sustain it. Any amount of HIMARS, missiles or whatever missile systems the Americans are going to help out. Because as Guliyat Duhut said, the famous air warfare specialist, it is air war which wins the battle. And if the Russians are going to have control of the skies over Ukraine, I don't see how Ukraine is going to win. They can fight well, they fought well, yes. But that is because they were not facing the full might of the Russian army. Russia only used a fraction of their forces in Ukraine. And they termed it as a limited military engagement, which is a foolish thing as it is, I have explained earlier. Because either you fight a war in total or you don't fight at all. Russians going in for a limited military engagement was a lot of BS. But anyway, what's done is done. I am not the leader of Russia. I can only comment. Now the situation is that Russia is hell-bent on integrating the areas in the eastern region, Donbass region, with Russia. They're going to hold a referendum, and I'm sure in that referendum, like in Crimea, the people are going to vote to join Russia. Once that happens, and these areas are declared by Russia as our territory, and there are going to be countries that are going to recognize it. Many of the countries will recognize. And maybe 1, 2, 5, 6, 10, whatever it is, but some will recognize. And the Anglo-Saxon powers may not recognize, yes. But then we must remember the Anglo-Saxon powers are on the wane, and they are on the wane because of their own foolishness. America, which was the supreme power after the First World War, has destroyed itself. Can anybody explain to me how after 1945, after winning the stupendous battles against the Germans and the Japanese, that the Americans couldn't win a single war after 1945? And what makes anybody feel by chance if they do come into Ukraine, they're going to win there? No way. So they're not going to win. And I understand, I have a few friends in good positions in America, and I've been told by them that under no circumstances is America going to intervene in Ukraine. And that is the opinion of the American General Staff. They don't want to fight in Ukraine. You can give weapons. They'll act as a deterrent to Russia, keep threatening Russia, like recently Biden said that if Russia was to use any nuclear weapons or anything like that, they'll have to pay a very terrible price for it. It's easy to talk, yes. But if by chance the Ukrainians do advance a little more, where is the guarantee Russia may not engineer a nuclear explosion in Ukraine? And what will happen? The half-life period of atomic nuclei is 50 years. That means nothing will go there for 50 years. And that Ukraine will be destroyed 50 years. What about the granary of Europe gone for 50 years? Somebody says I'm pro-Russia. Certainly not. The Russians are not my cup of tea at all. I'm a Democrat. But at the same time, I have to be a realistic man. I can't just keep talking bombastic things like some of the people are talking. I had a Ukrainian friend, he told me one day, I think one of the Ukrainian pilots shot down 2 or 3 Russian MiGs, and he was very euphoric about it. Look, we are going to win the war because our pilots are going shooting so many planes. But then they went and lost Kherson, and so many other places. So I asked the same man, I said, what have you gained? I mean, just shooting a few planes, tanks, this thing, you're not going to deter. You've got to have a negotiated settlement. And I think that is the best way forward for Ukraine, to have a negotiated settlement with Russia, in which they guarantee they will not join NATO, they will not join the EU. That is number one. Number two, they'll have to give up the areas which they have handed over in battle to the Russians. There's no other solution. I do not see any peace has to regain in Europe. And people who are talking that this fight should continue or this anything like that are talking out of their heads. We must remember the last two world wars, the epicenter was Europe. And they had the brunt of fighting. And I'm told, if I remember correctly, about 40 million people died in the battles in the Second World War, including 25 million Russians, 10 million Germans. Now, is that a good thing? You want another war there in Europe now? A world war? I think it would be in the best interest to have a negotiated settlement, and maybe you'll have to give something to the Russians. You can help it. Russia is a superpower because, as I've said earlier in my last video, Putin cannot afford to lose. If he loses, Russia will be finished as a world power forever. Russia has got a very strong ally, and that is China. China has got some little doubts now about the Ukrainian invasion, but they're still with them. And they're carrying out joint exercises in the Eastern Pacific, and the Western world is worried. When we talk of Western world, we include England. England is actually no power at all. I mean, it's just one of those countries which had an empire at one stage, but they lost and they've gone away. Now, it's about time the British realize that they're no longer a global power and just live their life easily. They don't even dominate Europe, where Germany is the powerhouse. America is the only formidable power in the world, and the world needs a very sagacious American president. Out of the lot which are in the race now, I can't think of anybody better than Donald Trump. And somehow I have a feeling, if Donald Trump had been around, this thing wouldn't have happened. The Ukraine battles wouldn't have taken place. After all, during the time of Obama and Trump, Russia annexed Ukraine. Nothing happened. So, if anybody feels anything big is going to happen now, I don't think so. But then, politics is an unpredictable game. You do not know what will happen. What if Putin goes? That will open a can of worms. We don't know what's going to happen. But as it stands, the situation stands slightly in favor of the Russians. I am pretty sure Ukraine cannot steamroll over the Russians. And I don't go by all the videos of one or two channels showing that Russian soldiers are running away, Russian showing are surrendering, Russian soldiers are shooting their officers. I mean, one's got to be a little realistic. And who's making these videos? I mean, best is to dump them in the Arabian Sea or the Atlantic Ocean. Gentlemen, I think now the situation is very clear. At least crystallizing now. Russia is playing all its cards, and at the moment it looks like they have the aces. They're going to integrate the Donbass region with Russia, make it a part of it. And Ukraine has said they're going to take it back. There's no way. So we'll have to see what happens. It's Hobson's choice for both Ukraine and Putin. But I'm sorry that Ukraine's leader, Yelenskii, has been led up the garden path by the Anglo-Saxon powers, and I would like to know what he has gained. I close now, gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you like and share my video, and God bless, take care, and Jai Hind.